Camelot burned. The night sky glowed red, the towers crowned with flame, sparks twisting upward like souls escaping the dying city. Smoke rolled through the courtyard, thick enough to taste bitter, heavy, the taste of endings. In the center stood Sir Lancelot. Armor scorched and dented, his sword hung at his side, the edge wet and red. It dripped slowly, each drop hissing as it struck the hot stone beneath his boots. Behind him, the gate sagged on its hinges. The great banners of the realm, the pride of every knight, sagged too, their silks blackened, edges curling in the heat. Somewhere beyond, a woman screamed for a child who would never answer. Lancelot's eyes followed the flames as they climbed the high windows of the great hall. That room had once been the heart of the kingdom. The round table had shone there like a sun, no head, no foot, only equals. Now it was a pyre. His gauntlet fingers tightened around the hilt. The weight was familiar, a weight of victories won, oaths sworn, lives spared and taken. This was the hand that had shielded Arthur in battle, the arm that had raised his banner, the voice that had sworn before all of Camelot, "I will protect my king, even if it costs me my life." But tonight, that same hand had cut through the king's guard. That same arm had thrown open the gate. That same voice had called the order that ended the kingdom. He was Arthur's greatest knight and his most dangerous enemy. Lancelot closed his eyes, but the darkness behind them was worse than the fire. It was filled with faces. Friends, brothers. The king himself, not as a ruler on a throne, but as a man laughing over bread and wine. Every oath is a sword with two edges, one to defend, one to betray. The wind shifted. Sparks whipped around him like embers seeking to brand his skin. He turned toward the inner keep, toward the place where the last living piece of the round table might still be found. And in the heart of the fire, Lancelot began to walk. Years before the fire, Camelot was all gold and promise. The great hall swelled with voices, banners swayed in the morning light, and the round table gleamed, no head, no foot, only equals. Lancelot knelt before the king, head bowed. Arthur stood tall, the sword in his hands catching the sun. The steel was bright, untouched by war, a ceremonial blade, heavy with meaning. "Rise, Sir Lancelot of the Lake," Arthur said, each word like a seal pressed into wax. The moment froze in ear. Steel touched shoulder. The hall held its breath. Then, from somewhere in the rafters, a bell chimed once, high, clear, and pure. Lancelot rose, meeting Arthur's eyes. There was no crown between them in that instant, no throne, only two men who would carry each other's lives into every battle. The crowd erupted in cheers. Knights pounded their fists on the table, goblets rang against wood, voices rose in a chorus of loyalty. But not every voice joined. At the edge of the crowd, a woman in a green gown stood perfectly still. Her hands folded, her eyes fixed on Lancelot, studying, not celebrating. He noticed her only for a second before Arthur gripped his forearm. "You're my brother now," the king said. In that moment, Lancelot believed it. They laughed, they clasped shoulders, and the hall roared again. Yet somewhere beyond the applause, in a place no sound could reach, a door cracked open, the kind you don't see until it's too late. And in that sliver of shadow, the woman in green smiled. Oaths, she knew, were not chains. They were keys, and the right hand could turn them either way. Guinevere's chambers were warm, but the air carried the weight of winter. The candlelight trembled against the stone walls, shadows moving like restless spirits. She stood by the window, looking out toward the dark gardens, then turned as Lancelot entered. "You came," she said softly, as though speaking louder might summon an unwanted ear. He bowed his head, unsure why the queen would call him at this hour. Her eyes searched his face, and for a moment he thought he saw gratitude, until he realized it was something far more fragile, fear. "Arthur is not the man you believe him to be," she whispered. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through every oath he had ever sworn. She stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "You see the crown. You see the battles won. But you do not see the men who suffer in silence, the voices he will not hear." Lancelot's joy tightened. "Name them," he said. Her gaze flicked to the closed door. "I cannot. Names would not save them. They would only bury them faster." The candle sputtered, smoke curling upward between them. He could feel the weight of her words pressing against his armor. "You have fought beside him," she said. "You have seen his mercy. But mercy can vanish. Power can change the hand that holds it." He wanted to dismiss her fears, to tell her she was wrong. But somewhere deep within, a small voice refused to be silenced. Guinevere reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve. "If you love him as you say, you must watch him, not as his knight, as his brother." Her eyes held his for a long moment, as if she were asking more than she could say aloud. Then she stepped back, the distance between them feeling colder than the night beyond the walls. Lancelot turned to leave, but paused at the door. The hall outside was empty, yet he could not shake the sense that someone or something had been listening. When he looked back, the queen had returned to the window, her face half hidden in shadow. And in that shadow, his certainty began to fade. Dawn broke with the clash of steel. The frost on the grass shattered beneath the hooves of charging horses, and the air was filled with the cold, sharp breath of war. Arthur rode at the front, his cloak streaming like a crimson banner in the pale light. Lancelot was at his side, shield up, scanning the chaos for the next threat. Smoke from burning carts curled low across the field, turning the morning into a battlefield of shifting shadows. Figures emerged from the haze, some armed, some not, their faces drawn tight with fear. A cry rose from somewhere in the mist. Lancelot's eyes found the source, a man on his knees, bareheaded, his empty hands raised high. His voice cracked as he begged for mercy. Arthur slowed only long enough for the man to see his face. Then the king's sword drove forward, swift and certain, cutting through the plea as if it had never been spoken. Lancelot's breath caught. The sound of the strike seemed louder than the battle around them. He pulled his horse to a halt, watching the man collapse into the frost. For a heartbeat, everything blurred, the shouting of knights, the ring of blades, the pounding of hooves. All of it faded beneath the weight of what he had just witnessed. This was not the justice he had sworn to defend. This was something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. Arthur pressed on, shouting orders to the knights who followed. His voice carried authority, unshaken by the life he had just taken. Lancelot remained still, his grip tightening on the reins. He could feel the first crack running through the foundation of his loyalty, a fracture that no oath could mend. Behind him, victory cries began to rise from the battlefield. Ahead, the frost still bore the mark of the fallen man, a mark that would not fade, not from the ground, and not from Lancelot's mind. He spurred his horse forward to follow his king, but the image rode with him, lodged deep in his memory like a splinter that could never be pulled free. The knock came just after sunset. When Lancelot opened the door, the messenger on the threshold looked as if he had run for miles. His cloak was damp with sweat despite the cold, and his eyes avoided Lancelot's entirely as he extended a folded parchment. The seal was not wax. It was dark, brittle, and flaked away beneath his thumb. The smell told him what his eyes already knew: it was blood. Inside, a single sentence waited in a steady, deliberate hand: Camelot must fall. No name signed it, but the letters themselves seemed to breed with recognition. Lancelot had seen this script before, years ago, in messages that had passed quietly through the court. It belonged to Morgana. Arthur's half-sister was a ghost in her own kingdom, always present, rarely noticed. She spoke little in the council hall, but when she did, her words lingered long after they had been spoken. Lancelot read the sentence again. It did not plead. It did not threaten. It simply stated what would be. He should have burned it then, dropped it into the fire, and watched the embers eat it. Instead, he folded it once, then again, and slid it into the inner pocket of his cloak. The paper felt heavier than steel. He told himself it was because he wanted to understand her intent before passing judgment. But deep down, he knew the truth. Some part of him needed this letter to exist. It gave shape to the doubts Guinevere had planted, to the fracture he had seen in Arthur's mercy. From the doorway, The messenger shifted uncomfortably. "Was there an answer?" he asked. Lancelot shook his head. "No answer." The man left quickly, disappearing into the dusk as though the night itself had swallowed him. Lancelot closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. The words on the page repeated in his mind, as steady and cold as a drumbeat. Camelot must fall. The ruins of the northern woods lay silent under a sky split by the moon. Lancelot's horse slowed to a halt at the edge of broken stone, its breath clouding in the cold air. He dismounted, the crunch of frost beneath his boots the only sound. She was already there. Morgana stood between two shattered columns, her hood drawn low, silver light tracing the sharp lines of her face. She did not move to greet him, only watched as he approached. "You came," she said, her voice carrying easily in the stillness. "You summoned me," Lancelot replied. "I invited you." She stepped forward, the hem of her cloak whispering against the frozen ground. "There is a difference." He said nothing, waiting. "You ride beside a king who believes fear is stronger than love," she went on. "And he is right, fear lasts longer, but it kills more than it saves." Lancelot's eyes narrowed. "And what would you have me do?" Morgana tilted her head. "Look around you. These ruins were once a keep. The people here trusted their lord. He ruled with fear. Now his name is dust. Camelot is not immune." She let the words hang between them, her gaze fixed on his. "There is a prophecy," she continued. "The burning of Camelot will save the realm from a war Arthur cannot win. And you, Lancelot, are the blade that will make it happen." His jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" Morgana smiled faintly. "You won't." The wind shifted, carrying the distant call of an owl. Somewhere in the darkness, ice cracked. Lancelot turned slightly, scanning the tree line. When he looked back, Morgana was closer, her eyes catching the moonlight. "Think on it," she said, "but not for long. The fire is coming, and it is better to be the hand that strikes than the neck it finds." She stepped back into the shadows until the night swallowed her completely. Lancelot stood alone in the ruins, the cold biting deeper than the frost. The feast hall was alive with music and light. Laughter echoed beneath the high arches, goblets clinked, and the scent of roasted meat drifted above the hum of conversation. The knights were at ease, their armor left in the barracks, their swords resting far from reach. Beyond the torchlit walls, the outer gate groaned open. The sound was swallowed by the music. They came quietly at first, shadows slipping between stone and firelight, then all at once, the raiders poured in like a black tide. By the time the first scream broke through the song, Lancelot was already moving. He cut through the chaos, not toward safety, but toward the throne. Arthur stood in the center of the hall, crown cast aside, his sword flashing in the firelight. The great banners above them caught fire, dropping embers into the melee. Their eyes met across the room, and in that instant the noise fell away. Only the two of them remained. Lancelot pushed forward, his blade meeting Arthur's with a sound that cut through every other. Sparks leapt between them as steel rang against steel. "Why?" Arthur demanded, his voice hoarse with effort and disbelief. Lancelot didn't answer. Words would only break what little remained between them. The clash drove them across the hall, overturning tables, scattering the dying feast. The weight of years fought side by side turned against them, each strike aimed at the heart. A beam cracked above, showering sparks onto the floor. The heat thickened, smoke curling low and stinging their eyes. Arthur's blade found Lancelot's shoulder, but the knight twisted away, answering with a strike that drove the king back toward the dais. Through the haze, Lancelot caught sight of a figure slipping through a side door, not a raider, but someone moving with purpose, someone who knew the hall's every shadow. The sight chilled him more than the fire's heat could burn. The enemy inside the walls was no longer a question. Arthur pressed forward again, teeth bared in effort. Lancelot met him, both knowing this fight would end one way or another, and soon. Dawn broke slowly over Camelot, as if the sun itself hesitated to look upon what remained. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the faint metallic tang of blood. Ash drifted lazily through the streets, settling on broken stone and blackened timber. The once proud towers stood jagged against the pale sky, their silhouettes hollow and lifeless. The banners were gone, burned to threads or trampled into the mud. In the courtyard, Arthur sat slumped against a fallen beam, his armor dented, his breath uneven. The crown lay on the ground beside him, tilted, as if unsure whether to stay or roll away. Lancelot stood over him, sword in hand. For a long moment, he said nothing. The world was quiet enough that he could hear the rasp of Arthur's breathing. "If I kill you," Lancelot said finally, "I kill what little good is left." He lowered the blade. Arthur's gaze held his for a heartbeat, confusion and sorrow warring in his eyes. But before either man could speak again, Lancelot turned and walked away, each step grinding ash into the stones. Among the ruins, half hidden in the shadow of a shattered archway, Morgana watched. Her face was calm, her hands clasped before her. She did not smile, but her eyes gleamed with something colder than triumph. This was not her victory. This was only the first step. Pride had fallen, but pride was never her true target. She had found another blade to wield, sharper, younger, hungrier. One that did not yet know the weight of the crown it would take. The wind shifted, scattering the ashes into a spiral around her. She turned away, her cloak sweeping the ground as she moved deeper into the ruins. Behind her, Camelot lay still. Before her, the future was already taking shape. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the next fire was waiting.